nerds. So, gonna talk about my favorite Hegelian slash Lacanian slash Marxist philosopher and professional shit disturber, Slavoj Zizek, his debate slash conversation with Peter Singer, who's a utilitarian moral philosopher. He's famous for being a vegetarian and writing Animal Liberation. That's his famous book. I've read it. It makes good arguments, but it didn't convince me. Obviously, it convinced a lot of people. Anyway, they have an interesting exchange about morality, and Slavoj Žižek, as usual, likes to be bombastic and have hyperbolic opinions. So we'll get into it here.
You described Peter's view, as he's outlined it there, as traumatic and intolerable and scandalous.
This is the highest praise that I can give unto somebody, my God.
That's scandalous and traumatic. But he goes on to explain that later on in the clip that it's good to him because it's not boring. Yeah, I love the fact that he's like half trolling most of the time.
We are rational beings in a sense that non-human animals generally are not, although I don't think it's a sharp distinction. I think there's a...
No, that's like wrong in my opinion. We're not moral. Humans do not act, not morally. Humans do not act rationally. Like, I've explained this many times, and there are many people who agree or disagree about this, but I learned a lot about this in terms of moral foundations theory that I first learned about from Jonathan Haidt, the moral psychologist. And he has many, I forget what his famous book is, but that idea came from. But he talked with David Sloan Wilson, and I think Joe Henrich are famous for, spreading moral foundations theory. Basically, and part of that, and part of why I'm no longer a militant atheist and I see the truth, well, in my opinion, that militant atheists like Sam Harris are dumb because they claim that humans are rational, and this is what they say to be against religion. And like, you don't have to be a militant atheist and say like religion poisons society. It turns out that evolutionarily speaking, religions have bonded societies together a lot, which doesn't mean they're essential for society, but they're good for helping societies function. But anyway, basically if you go into like the studies that Jonathan Haidt gets into in his book, if you actually get into peer-reviewed and replicated studies on this, although replication crisis notwithstanding in social science, we actually behave starting with our intuitions, and then we rationalize forward from that. It's not like we're rationally saying, I know rationally that God exists, or I rationally know that God doesn't exist. We just go with our intuitions, and then we rationalize forth from that. We can rationalize anything. Obviously, we can be more self-aware, and we can have something closer to rational opinions. But humans are not rational animals, but like, we're not. Maybe we're more sentient than some other animals, but that's not the same as being rational.
Continuum, but certainly you would say some non-human animals are not rational beings. They're more instinctive or more moved by immediate emotions and desires. But I think with us, morality has a rational component. But what I think we're getting there is an insight into something that other rational beings, if they exist, would also see. So in that sense, I don't think morality is purely human either. I think if we had intelligent aliens coming to visit us, or maybe even super intelligent AGI, it would recognize some of our moral principles as being rationally defensible.
Yeah, let's bring Slavoj in on.
I can see that. Like, if you agree that humans are rational, then like, if I take for granted that humans are rational, I would agree that humans are not any more or less rational than animals necessarily. And like, if aliens or robots come and invade Earth in the future, they're not necessarily even any more or less rational than humans or animals, even though they might seem that way to us because maybe they follow rationality more, but maybe that makes you more cold and calculating and have less empathy. This theme has been bore out in science fiction innumerable times, right? But yeah, like there's a difference between sentience and morality. And like I was talking about in terms of moral foundations theory before, part of this is that like it, in my opinion, and this seems to be pretty well replicated, and I'm convinced by arguments of this, at least humans we just naturally evolve moral compasses. It doesn't mean there's any such thing as universal moral human values, but people have a sense of right and wrong, even though they might be different. Like most people in most cultures agree you shouldn't rape and murder people most of the time. Obviously, that's not a black and white rule. It varies, but people have a sense of what's right and wrong. That's why, like, for example, there was literally a priest I was debating about with this sometimes, because he asked me, if I'm not a Christian, why don't I rape babies? I'm like, I don't want to fucking rape babies. If the only your belief in God is the only thing from preventing you from raping babies, then you've got really fucking way bigger problems than that, and you should see a fucking psychiatrist immediately because you're probably a fucking pedophile. So it's it everyone has a moral compass. If you're not religious, you're still going to have a sense of right and wrong. And in the same way, if you're biased against religious people, it's not like a religious person is going to necessarily have a worse moral compass. There are obviously cases when, you know, Christian empathy or whatever has led people to being pacifists, and it doesn't. It's whether you're religious or not doesn't really matter, in my opinion. What matters is what kind of person you are, because what kind of person you are determines how you operate your morality and use your religion or lack thereof to excuse your moral decisions or justify them, whether you're religious or non-religious.
On this point, Slavoj, I came across a quote from you recently where you described Peter's view, as he's outlined it there, as traumatic and intolerable and scandalous. Whereas you're in your outline of your view, you seem very much on board with Peter and Nancy's opening remarks. So where is the point of disagreement?
Wait a minute. You totally misunderstood my deeply pathological worldview. For me, the word that you used, scandalous, traumatic, this is the highest praise that I can give unto somebody, my God.
My God.
People who are not these are boring.
My God. That's one of his catchphrases. My God. And so on and so on. Blah, blah, blah.
Everyday idiots.
I'm going to go back a few seconds.
All this highest praise that I can give unto somebody, my God. People who are not these are boring everyday idiots. I mean, all discovery works like this. I agree with both of you about this, that something like, okay, we don't have a better term, morality, reciprocity, even justice exists at a certain level also with certain from our standards, some highly developed animals. But nonetheless, I would say that was my not critical point, but simple observation that isn't it nonetheless that we humans are exceptions in precisely the sense that precisely those who claim we are just among one of the species on the earth, they, under quotation marks, humiliate us like don't think you are the center, but at the same time, they give us the privilege to act as universal agents, to take care, to have a responsibility also for the well-being, less suffering of all us.
I think I see what he's getting at. Like if you say that humans have not even necessarily more, like they're morally better people or they're more rational, maybe just even increased sentience allows us to have dominion over other animals, and that's like basically can sound like a classical liberal or conservative opinion. Like I was getting into that opinion of the Enlightenment philosopher John Locke. I think his almost exact wording was that man's superiority over animals is what allows us to have dominion over them. So he's kind of actually having like a surprisingly classical liberal opinion here, but in a completely different way, which is how Slavoj Zizek does everything.
Other animals.
You described vegetarians in a talk recently as degenerates.
Maybe that's more praise.
I wonder, again, is that more?
Diet cults are stupid, in my opinion. The best diet for you is the one that works for you. Like, you can debate about the health of nutrition, and there's certainly many foods that are way more healthy than other foods, and I follow somewhat of a diet, but diet cults are stupid. You don't need to follow diet cults, whether it's vegetarianism or carnivorism. But if you want to do that and it works for you, then do that. But don't be fucking food Nazi and pressure people into eating the way you do.
Praise, or do you disagree that that's the goal for the effort?
Yeah, was him calling vegetarians degenerates a compliment?
Also for the well-being, less suffering of all other animals.
You described vegetarians in a talk recently as degenerates.
Maybe that's more praise.
I wonder, again, is that more praise, or do you disagree that that's the goal for the effort?
And I mean it literally. Listen, even human sexuality, by definition, in some fundamental sense,
Let me answer your question about vegetarians being degenerate by talking about human sexuality.
Degenerate, because it's against generation. Sorry, I never understood Catholic Church when they say the ultimate
he means
goal
or do you disagree that that's the goal for the effort?
And I mean it literally. Listen, even human sexuality, by definition, in some fundamental sense, degenerate, because it's against generation. Sorry, I never understood Catholic Church when they say the ultimate goal of sexual act should be giving birth. Sorry, animals are doing like this. We humans have something that we call love, passion, which is much more spiritual, where it's ridiculous to say, honey, we may enjoy.
Yeah, like love and passion. They allow us to make sex more of like a spiritual act or an art form, and but plenty of like even mystical religious people have had these opinions for hundreds or even thousands of years, and it's not like procreation is the sole purpose of sex laid out by God. So that makes sense. But so he's saying that most people are degenerates when they're having sex because they're not doing it for procreation, and he sees this as a good thing. So that's why he says that vegetarians are degenerates, and that's a good thing as well, because you're inherently doing what you're not supposed to do. But why should you have to do what you're supposed to do? There's nothing wrong with being a degenerate inherently.
Enjoy, but remember, we really are doing it for a child.
There's been a movement in the animal rights literature to not just argue that we owe non-human animals like better treatment on our part, but to stop them from harming each other. Do you worry that this kind of rhetoric about reparations or stopping animals from harming each other is counterproductive for the movement?
Kind of.
It's not that there isn't a lot of suffering in nature. I don't think we should revere nature. Clearly, nature is absurd in some ways, and species who produce hundreds or even thousands of offspring when nearly all of them are going to die. You know that on average only 2 of them are going to survive. Otherwise, we'd be knee deep in frogs or fish or whatever species we're talking about. So yes, nature is incredibly wasteful, and you can certainly imagine trying to reduce the amount of suffering in it. But I don't think we really have much idea of how to do that, except maybe around the margins. We can try and you can stop your cat playing with a mouse, maybe, if you see that going on. You can try to install glass where birds are not going to fly into the windows. Some of those things will help nature. But actually to try to interfere with predator-prey relationships or with methods of reproduction seems to me to be far-fetched at this stage.
I don't know what's
I'd
going
say so.
wrong, because we should hate each other with Peter, but I more and more agree with you.
He
You know
usually does
what?
that.
Correct me, you must know this better. I think I read somewhere, correct me again if I'm wrong, that how Darwin began to doubt in God. In one of these stupid islands that he visited in Latin America, were there some turtles whose natural reproduction was they approached the coast, but they had to pass over a certain gap, and most of them fell wrongly down, turned on their back, and suffered because they couldn't turn around, a terrifying long suffering before they died. So there came some too aggressive ecologists who said, why don't we help them? So they hired locals to turn the turtles on their back. Yes, turtles survived, but their excessive survival ruined the whole balance of life in that part. You see, that's the tragedy. So again, agree.
Yeah, so I think what he's getting at is that Darwin lost his religion because he figured out that Earth made him stop believing in God because he saw that the turtles were falling onto their backs and then dying a long suffering death. So he got locals to turn them back onto their legs, but then they started getting so crazy, so they overbalanced the balance of nature and overtook. You can imagine what would happen. They would overtake other species, and then the predators would start preying on the wrong prey, and then there would be too many of this species, too little of these species, and it would all get completely fucked up. So I can see that in what he's getting at. Although, like, that isn't much of a reason, but I see what he means.
Agreeing with Peter, I would say be very careful here. We don't really know how things that may appear horrible to us may be a crucial part of how nature reproduces itself.
Yeah, maybe some animals just dying out and animals killing other animals and us killing animals is just part of nature, and if that wouldn't happen there would be overpopulation. But obviously you shouldn't just slaughter animals willy-nilly, and you can be a degenerate. You can be a degenerate as a vegetarian or as someone who eat meats. I'm a proud degenerate, but eat whatever you want to eat. But it's interesting to consider, like, should we interfere with nature? If we should, to what extent? Maybe we should, but it's hard to find the right balance in terms of how and when we should interfere and to what degree. But yeah, be degenerate, because being a degenerate is awesome. Adios until next time, degenerate nerds.